Over the run of Star Trek the Original Series, fandom was treated to 79 episodes of the series, some good, some okay, and some downright horrible. But like most series, there were quite a few episodes that never made it into the Star Trek run. But what were these episodes? Well, today we find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at some of the abandoned episode ideas for Star Trek the Original Series, to better understand their place in Star Trek history. There certainly was no shortage of episode ideas for Star Trek. From the moment the series was picked up for production, Hollywood and science fiction writers alike would submit story outlines and scripts in the hopes of making a few bucks, and seeing their creations on the little screen. Some of these story ideas would in fact be bought, while others would enter various stages of production, only to see their life cut short for various reasons and then completely abandoned. While others would have certain plot elements removed from their storylines, reworked, and end up becoming plot points in various other episodes of the original series. These types of topics have always fascinated me, as it gives an insight not only into what could have been for Star Trek, but also into those involved within the show, and why they would give up on some of these stories. For example, in a story outlined by Robert Barry entitled Aladdin's Asteroid, the USS Enterprise and its heroic crew would have encountered a spaceship disguised as an asteroid. Although the producers of the show thought Barry's outline was original and imaginative, it was deemed far too expensive to produce. However, this concept would later be reused in the Season 3 episode, For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. And there are many examples such as that one. So I began to think that maybe you good trinaries might enjoy a trip back in time to hear about some of these lost treasures and why they never materialized. And as always, I hope you enjoy. In a story outline submitted by Norman Katkov from the spring of 1966, and inspired by the 1958 sci-fi cult classic film It, The Terror from Beyond Space, the Enterprise is invaded by an invisible, powerful alien being, capable of smashing rooms and tossing crew members through the air around the ship. Though initially very interested in the idea, Gene Roddenberry would ultimately axe the production on this episode, when subsequent story development would see it include more and more violence, causing his staff to ultimately dislike the concept, deeming that it would never pass the censors of the time and would never be filmable within the show's production budget. Bandy was a story idea submitted by none other than David Gerrold, the mastermind behind the Season 2 episode The Trouble with Tribbles. Submitted in February of 1967, the story, primarily set aboard the Enterprise, would see a mascot of sorts smuggled aboard the Federation starship. This creature, named Bandy, has empathic abilities which cause people to have sympathy for it. Captain Kirk wants it confined to quarters, but of course Bandy escapes by using its persuasive empathy on a nearby crew member. When another crew member dies because of the distraction caused by the creature, Kirk wants Bandy off his ship, but Bandy turns the crew against Kirk until Spock is forced to kill the creature, at which point the crew then returns to normal. Gene and the production powers that be were never quite happy with the story, and although mulled over, with a few attempts to correct the problems contained within it, Bandy would ultimately be dropped, though there would be certain elements that would be included in The Trouble with Tribbles, such as the effect the Tribbles would have on the crew, just not to the extremes that this story outline would have seen. As for David Gerrold, he would end up adapting this story for the third volume of Star Trek the manga, and the name Bandy, which Gerrold disliked, would end up being used in the TNG pilot episode Encounter at Farpoint. Submitted July 1st, 1968 by director Mark Daniels, the Beast would see Kirk and 3 crew members in a shuttlecraft visiting a planet rich in saminium, a rare and precious mineral desperately needed by the Federation. But while investigating the planet, the crew are horrified to discover that the material is guarded by a beast, a caretaker who captures Kirk, while the 3 crew members manage to escape. When the Enterprise arrives back at the planet after completing a side mission, Kirk is beamed up, however, so is the beast, a beast that refuses to let Kirk go. Finally, Anthropology Officer Janet Matthews, an Esper, is able to communicate with the creature through her mind and convinces it to release the good captain. Though Gene loved the story, producers Fred Freiberger and Robert Justman hated it, and eventually it was scrapped. A story outlined by David P. Harmon, submitted on April 16, 1968, this story featured the Enterprise being shrunk down to miniature size and placed on a tabletop as a decoration of sorts by strange alien beings. This story idea was quickly dropped as the producers didn't see much point in the story at all, having this advanced alien race simply searching the galaxy for trinkets for their shelving units. Add to that, the story outline contained several, in the words of the producers, ripped-off concepts from other Star Trek episodes, such as the crew being chased by a giant cat, and you can see why this story was quickly abandoned. Chicago 2, also known as The Syndicate, was a story outlined by George Clayton Johnson, based on Gene Roddenberry's idea for a story which he had called President Capone, and was an episode idea for early season 1 of the series. Roddenberry wanted a story to deal with parallel Earth development, where gangsters would have taken over a planet, and mob rule dominated all. Though a great idea, Johnson simply wasn't able to make the story work, and Gene would axe the story altogether, assigning Johnson to work on the Man-Trap story outline instead. However, while searching the Star Trek archives for Season 2 ideas, Gene Kuhn and David P. Harmon would dust off the idea and resurrect it into a comedic episode they called A Piece of the Action. Following the success of Mudd's Women and I, Mudd, a third TOS episode featuring the character of Harry Mudd was originally planned for the 3rd season. Titled Deep Mud, the story was written by Stephen Kandel as a direct sequel to the events of I, Mudd. In the story, Harry Mudd escapes from the android world after he tricked them into revealing the location of a vault filled with ancient but advanced scientific equipment and weaponry. He would end up bribing a group of pirates into helping him escape the planet, promising them these weapons in return for their help. The problem was, though, that Mudd knew nothing about the weaponry and had no way of controlling them. The pirates, along with Harry Mudd, would end up on a planet's surface battling the Enterprise's landing party, where a knockdown, drag-out battle in a mud pit was to have taken place, and eventually Kirk and company would win that fight. This episode was actually fully developed, even though Gene Roddenberry was completely against it as he didn't want to have pirate stories, because in his future, pirates wouldn't exist, a view he would apparently abandon by the time of the animated series. But Deep Mud would be axed simply because Roger C. Carmel was not available for filming, being completely booked up during the 3rd season production window. So the episode was shelved for a Season 4 release. However, it would never materialize as of course Star Trek would be cancelled during its 3rd season. The Foreseeable Future, a story submitted by Jean Lassette Aroest in August of 1968, revolved around a race of telepaths with precognitive abilities. These telepaths had the unusual ability of being able to see their own near future. One of the telepaths, a young woman, ends up having a vision about Captain Kirk, telling him he's going to die if he leaves the planet. The entire story's message was about either accepting one's fate as inevitable and letting it happen, or trying to change the outcome. The producers were not impressed with the story at all, feeling that the flow along with the message of the episode didn't really fit Star Trek, and so they abandoned the idea, putting Gene on an episode that would eventually become All Our Yesterdays. Galatea of Polydor was written by Lawrence N. Wolfe and submitted in November of 1967. In the story, the Enterprise is escorting a diplomatic team to the planet Polydor. Among them is a woman named Galatea, who bears an uncanny resemblance to one of Kirk's old lovers. Unbeknownst to the crew, however, the diplomats are actually androids, and the Enterprise's transporter ends up changing their programming, making them yearn to be free and lead their own lives at any cost. Put simply, Star Trek's production staff deemed this story to be very boring, and chose not to develop it further, though elements of the story would end up in the Season 3 episode Requiem for Methuselah. The Godhead was written by John Meredith Lucas in March of 1968. Lucas was no stranger to Star Trek, having written 4 episodes of the original series, directing 3 episodes, and producing 10 episodes. The story was about an alien race who created a way to accumulate their vast knowledge by placing it in the mind of one selected individual. However, this person, known as the Godhead, became mentally unstable by the process, and decided to take over the Enterprise with the intent on conquering the galaxy. The story was actually fully fleshed out and almost at film-ready stage, slated to be the 26th episode of the 3rd season. However, NBC of course cancelled the series without ordering the last 2 episodes, resulting in this episode, The Godhead, and the previous episode, The Joy Machine, to never be produced. There are many ideas in these episodes that would see their way into future Star Trek and other science fiction series. Stepping back and wondering what Star Trek could have been had these episodes actually made it in production fascinates me to no end. Adding just a little bit more to the Star Trek universe and fandom's imagination as a whole, and truly adding weight to one of Star Trek's theme's opening lines, "Where no man has gone before." Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrek. What do you think of these abandoned story ideas? Which ones would you have loved to have seen made? Would you like me to create more of these videos about these lost tales? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel flesh out its own storyline? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.